You clicked because you have a car sitting in your driveway right now, and somewhere in the back of your mind you're wondering how much longer it'll last before it bleeds you dry. I stood in a gravel lot in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and watched a hired driver's van roll past 300,000 miles like it was nothing. That van belonged to an Amish community's driver, and it had never once seen a dealership repair bay. The man behind it told me a car should last 500,000 miles, and repairs are mostly a story we've been sold. I laughed at him. Then I spent 2 years finding out he was right. Stay with me, because near the end I'll show you a single overlooked habit written down in a 1950s maintenance logbook that changes everything. Now let me back up, because I was the biggest skeptic you could imagine. I traded cars every 4 or 5 years. I thought that was just responsible. I thought a car was a machine that slowly fell apart no matter what you did, and the smart move was to get out before the big bills hit. That's what I was taught. That's what the commercials told me. And every single time, I lost thousands of dollars the moment I drove off the lot. Then did it all over again a few years later. So when that driver, a quiet man named Amos who ran people to appointments and grocery runs for 3 Amish families, told me his previous van hit 480,000 miles before he sold it to a farmer who's still using it, I assumed he was exaggerating. Nobody keeps a vehicle that long. Nobody. But here's the first thing that cracked my certainty. I asked him what big repairs he'd done over all those miles. He looked at me like I'd asked a strange question, and he said none. No transmission. No engine work. Nothing but the small things, done on time, every time. That answer didn't make sense to me. So I started digging. And what I found is that almost everything I believed about why cars die is wrong. Let me start with the very first habit, because it's so simple you'll be angry nobody told you. The Amish don't drive cars, but they own the machines that matter to their livelihood, and they hire drivers whose entire income depends on those vans lasting. So the incentive is flipped. A normal person wants the car to survive until the next upgrade. These men need it to survive forever. And the first thing Amos did that I never did was this. He warmed the engine before he demanded anything from it. Every single morning, he started that van and let it idle gently, then drove the first few miles slow and easy, never pushing the engine hard until the temperature needle came off the cold peg. I always did the opposite. Cold start, straight onto the highway, foot down, because I was late. And here's what I learned from an engineering study out of Purdue University's mechanical engineering work on cold start wear. The vast majority of engine wear happens in the first minutes after a cold start, before the oil reaches every surface. When you rev a cold engine, metal grinds against metal with barely any protection. Do that twice a day for years, and you've sanded your engine down from the inside. Amos never did. And his engines outlived mine by 200,000 miles. So I thought I'd cracked it. Warm the engine, save the car. Simple. But then I looked closer at what he did after the drive, and I realized the cold start was only the smallest piece. Because the second habit had nothing to do with driving at all. It had to do with oil, and here is where my whole understanding fell apart. I always believed oil was oil. You change it when the little sticker on the windshield tells you to. You use whatever the quick lube place pours in, and you forget about it. That's the modern way. Convenient, hands off, and completely backwards. Amos changed his oil himself, and he did it more often than any shop would ever recommend, but that wasn't the real secret. The real secret was that he read the oil. When he drained it, he'd catch some in a clear jar and look at it in the sunlight. He was looking for color, for grit, for a metallic shimmer that tells you something inside is starting to wear. He learned this from an old mechanic, and that mechanic learned it from the days when a family kept one vehicle or one tractor for 30 years because they couldn't afford anything else. I want you to understand what this means, because it took me a long time to feel it. Your car is talking to you constantly. The oil is a diagnostic sample as good as anything a lab runs. Iowa State University's extension work on engine maintenance for farm equipment says the same thing in plainer language. Regular used oil inspection catches component failure months before it becomes catastrophic. Months. That's the difference between a $20 fix and a $5,000 engine. But I want to be honest with you about something, because I promised you the truth and not a sales pitch. The reason you and I never learned to read our own oil isn't an accident, and this is where my investigation got uncomfortable. Because the entire modern car economy is built on you not knowing these things. Think about it. The dealership makes more money on service than on selling you the car. The whole system, the sealed hoods, the warning lights that only turn on after the damage is done, the manuals that say take it to a professional, all of it is designed to keep your hands off your own machine and your wallet open. Amos said it plainly. When you don't understand something, you have to pay someone else to be afraid for you, and fear is expensive. So let me give you the third habit, and this one you can do this week no matter what you drive. Amos kept a small notebook in the glove box. Nothing fancy. In it he wrote the date, the mileage, and every single thing he did to that van, no matter how small. Topped off the coolant, rotated the tires, noticed a faint noise on left turns, everything. And because he wrote it all down, he could see patterns forming long before they became problems. He knew that van better than any computer could because he had 2 years of handwritten history telling him exactly what was normal and what was new. I started doing this with my own car, a 9-year-old sedan I'd already half given up on. Within a month, I caught a slow coolant leak just from noticing the level dropped a little faster than my notebook said it should. A $10 hose clamp. If I'd waited for the temperature gauge to spike, I'd have been looking at a warped head and a repair bill bigger than the car was worth. That's the thing nobody tells you. The car doesn't die from the big dramatic failure. It dies from the small thing you didn't catch that quietly destroyed the big expensive thing next to it. But the notebook led me to something stranger, because when I asked Amos how he knew what was normal for a machine he'd only owned 2 years, he told me something that sent me down the next hole entirely. He said, "I don't just know this van. I know how machines age, and I learned that from horses. Now stay with me, because this is the part that changed how I see everything." The Amish have kept working animals alive and productive for generations, and the mindset they use on a horse is exactly the mindset that makes a vehicle last 500,000 miles. You don't wait for the horse to collapse and then treat it. You watch it every single day. You notice the small change in its gait, its appetite, its breathing, and you act on the small thing before it becomes the big thing. Prevention isn't a task you do occasionally. It's a way of paying attention all the time. And when Amos brought that same attention to a van, the van behaved like a well-kept animal. It gave him warning after warning, and he listened to every one. I found the same philosophy written down in an agricultural handbook from the early 1900s, back when a farm family's survival depended on machinery and animals lasting decades, not years. The book said the wise farmer spends an hour of care to save a day of ruin. That's the whole secret in one sentence, written more than 100 years ago, and then quietly forgotten the moment we could afford to throw things away and buy new. So that's habit 4. Stop treating maintenance as a chore on a schedule. Start treating your car like a living thing you observe daily. Walk around it. Look at the tires. Listen when you start it. Feel how it drives. You'll catch things a mechanic sees only after they've already cost you. But here's where I hit a wall in my investigation, because attention is fine for a man who understands machines. What about the rest of us who wouldn't know a warning sign if it bit us? I asked Amos that directly, and his answer became the next 5 habits. He said the beauty of it is that a car mostly dies from just a handful of things, and if you protect those few things, everything else lasts almost forever. The first is heat. Heat is the great killer of engines, and the thing that controls heat is your cooling system, the coolant and the radiator and the hoses. Amos flushed and replaced his coolant on a strict schedule, far more often than most people ever think about, because old coolant turns acidic and eats the engine from the inside. A study from the University of Nebraska's engineering work on cooling systems found that degraded coolant is behind a huge share of major engine failures that people blame on bad luck. It's not bad luck. It's neglected coolant. And that sentence stuck in me like a splinter, but before I show you what I did next, I want to tell you about something I put together for people who want to go deeper than a single video can take them. Everything I uncovered across those 2 years of research, the full logbook method, the fluid inspection system, the Amish approach to machines and ownership, I organized it all into a book called Plain Wisdom. And I also expanded it across 2 companion titles, Amish Depth and the Amish Blueprint. If you want the complete picture in your hands, something you can come back to every time you pop the hood or hear a sound you don't recognize, the details are in the description below. Now, with that said, let me get back to the third habit, because this one you can do this week no matter what you drive. The second killer is dirty fluid anywhere it lives. Transmission fluid, brake fluid, power steering fluid, differential fluid. Most people never touch these until something breaks. Amos changed every fluid in that van on a rhythm, and he told me the transmission is the clearest example of the whole lie. People think transmissions just fail. They don't. They fail because the fluid was never changed, turned to sludge, and cooked itself. Keep the fluid clean and a transmission will outlast the car around it. The third killer is vibration and looseness. Every bolt, every belt, every mount. On a buggy, a loose bolt will destroy a wheel and maybe hurt the horse, so the Amish check fasteners obsessively. Amos did the same with his van. He'd tighten, inspect, and replace worn belts long before they snapped. A snapped belt on the highway can cascade into thousands of dollars of damage in seconds. A new belt costs less than a nice dinner. The fourth killer is moisture and rust, and this one I'd completely ignored my whole life. Amos washed the underside of that van, especially in winter, to get the road salt off. Salt is what turns a good car into scrap from the bottom up, rotting the frame and the brake lines while the paint still looks fine. Cornell University's work in New York, where they salt the roads hard, has documented how salt corrosion shortens vehicle life dramatically, and almost nobody rinses the undercarriage. It costs nothing. It adds years. The fifth killer is the driver. Hard braking, hard acceleration, slamming over potholes, riding the brakes down hills. Every violent thing you do transfers into wear. Amos drove like the van was carrying eggs, and it repaid him with hundreds of thousands of gentle miles. So there it was. Protect against heat, dirty fluid, looseness, rust, and rough handling, and a car will run almost forever. I felt like I finally understood. I really did. But then I turned to you, because I know exactly what you're thinking right now. You're thinking, that's fine for a man who does his own maintenance and has time to fuss over a vehicle. You're thinking, I live in a normal house, I've got a normal busy life, I can barely find time to get the oil changed, let alone inspect coolant in a jar. I heard that voice in my own head too. So this next part is for you, exactly as your life is right now. With the car you already own and no special skills and no garage full of tools, here is what you can do this week. First, tonight, put a cheap notebook in your glove box and write down today's date and mileage. That's it. That's the start. From now on, every time anything happens, you write one line. It takes 10 seconds, and it will save you thousands. Second, tomorrow morning, before you drive off, sit for 60 extra seconds and let the engine settle, and drive the first mile gently. You don't need to understand engines. You just need to give the oil time to do its job. That one habit alone, done daily, adds years. Third, this weekend, find the owner's manual in your glove box, the one you've never opened, and look up the recommended interval for your transmission fluid and your coolant. Just look. Most people discover they're tens of thousands of miles overdue on fluids they didn't even know existed. Then get those done. Not the fancy dealership package. Just those specific fluids at any honest shop, and tell them exactly what you want. Fourth, next time it rains, let it rinse your car, and in winter, run it through a cheap car wash that sprays the undercarriage. That single habit fights the rust that quietly kills most cars from below. None of that requires a wrench. None of it requires knowledge you don't have. It's just attention, applied on purpose, the way the Amish apply it to everything they own. And I promise you, if you do only those 4 things, your next car repair bill will shrink, and the car you have right now will last years longer than you expected. But I told you at the start that the biggest thing was hidden in an old logbook, and I haven't given it to you yet, because there was still one piece of the mystery I couldn't crack. I kept asking myself, how did Amos know the exact right moment to do each thing? Not too early, wasting money, not too late, risking ruin, because that timing is everything. And he kept telling me it wasn't magic, it was written down. He said his method came from something a retired mechanic gave the community decades ago, and he'd copied it by hand. It took me months to actually see it. And when I did, I understood why almost no one lives this way anymore. What he showed me was a maintenance logbook, the kind fleet operators and careful farmers kept back in the 1950s, before computers, before dashboard warning lights, before anyone told us to just trust the machine. In that era, a vehicle was too expensive to replace casually, so people tracked them like accountants track money. And the core of that old system was one idea that has been almost completely erased from modern car ownership. The idea is this: you service a part based on how it actually performs over time, not on a fixed calendar and not on a warning light. In that logbook, every fluid, every belt, every part had its own recorded history, and you watched the trend. When the oil started darkening a little sooner than last time, that told you something was changing inside, so you acted early. When the coolant needed topping off a little more often, that was the part telling you it needed attention, months before any gauge would ever light up. Modern cars flip this completely. They wait until a sensor detects that something is already failing, then they light up a warning. By the time that light comes on, the damage has usually started. The old logbook method catches the problem while it's still just a whisper. The warning light catches it after it's already screaming. And here's the piece that genuinely stunned me, the thing that made me sit down. The old logbooks track something they called the drift. Not the absolute number, but the change in the number over time. How much oil the engine used between changes, how much the coolant dropped each month, how the fuel mileage trended week to week. Because a healthy machine holds steady, and the very first sign of any problem, long before failure, is that one of those numbers starts to drift. Your fuel mileage is the easiest one, and you already have everything you need. Amos watched his mileage like a hawk. When a tank of fuel started taking him fewer miles than usual, and the weather and the driving hadn't changed, he knew something was beginning to go wrong. A dragging brake, a dying sensor, a tire losing pressure, an engine running rich. Every one of those, caught early from a small drop in mileage, is cheap to fix. Ignored until it becomes a breakdown, every one is expensive. So here is the finale. The thing from that 1950s logbook that you can start this weekend with nothing but the notebook I already told you to buy. Every time you fill your tank, write down the mileage and how much fuel it took. Do the simple division, or just watch the trip numbers. You're now tracking the single most sensitive early warning signal your car produces, the same signal careful operators used 70 years ago to run vehicles for 500,000 miles. When that number drifts down and stays down, you investigate before the breakdown, not after. That's it. That's the secret the warning lights were designed to make you forget. The knowledge was never lost by accident. It existed plainly in the hands of every careful owner who couldn't afford to be careless. Then we got rich enough to stop caring, the industry got smart enough to profit from our carelessness, and the whole method quietly slipped out of ordinary life. But a few people, out on those farms and in those quiet communities, kept doing it the old way because they never stopped needing to. And now it's in your hands too. I think about that first day in the gravel lot all the time. I showed up certain that a car was a disposable thing and repairs were just the price of living. I drove home 2 years later, having watched a van cross distances I thought were impossible, kept alive by nothing more than attention, a notebook, and the refusal to let anyone else be afraid on my behalf. You are the kind of person who trusts their own hands and their own eyes over a blinking light on a dashboard and a salesman's smile. You always were. Somewhere along the way, we all got talked out of it. This is you taking it back. So here's what I want to know from you. When was the last time you actually opened the owner's manual sitting in your glove box right now, and did you even know your transmission fluid had a schedule? Tell me in the comments honestly, and tell me where you're watching from, because I read every single one, and I want to know how many of us were kept in the dark the same way. Leave that comment. This audience stays quiet, and I'd rather hear your voice. And if any part of this made you look at your car differently, come stand with the rest of us who are quietly recovering what was taken from all of us, one forgotten habit at a time. Because in the next one, I'm going to show you the old Amish way of buying a used vehicle, the 3-minute inspection that tells you whether a car was loved or abused before you ever spend a dollar, straight out of the same tradition that keeps these machines running for 500,000 miles. Don't miss it. If you've stayed with me all the way here, let me tell you what comes next. This video gave you the overview, but inside the plain living circle, I pick up right where we stopped. In there, you can ask me your own questions, and I answer you myself, a real person, not a machine. And you won't be alone. Folks like you are already inside. Just point your phone's camera at the code on screen. Cancel anytime, one click. No risk.